Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
And welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Monday morning. We're asking the question, are church disciplinary decrees harmful to souls? Now, I'm doing this specifically because I've spoken about this in other episodes, although not in the detail that I'm going to do today. And some people were asking for me to go into this in more detail. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you some sources from Monsignor Van Noort, Joachim Salvaverri, let's see, Doctrine, Donum Veritatis, John Paul II, and the Council of Trent. So that's what we have in store today. This is not exhaustive by any means. I'm just giving an introductory video to this question. And what do we mean first by safety? Are disciplinary decrees of the church, which are universal, not any kind of local ones, but universal disciplinary decrees, are they harmful to souls or are they safe? What do we mean by safety? What do we mean by harmful to souls? What is meant here is simply that these decrees would not take a person off the path of salvation if they obey them and if they maintain them. So in other words, the obedience that is owed to these disciplinary decrees would not deter them from achieving their final supernatural end with God in heaven. That is what is meant by safety. So safety doesn't mean that it's the most prudent. We'll get into that distinction here in a moment, but it just simply means that it won't be harmful to souls. Now, why is this important? Because there are a lot of people today who are saying the universally promulgated liturgical decrees of the church, especially in the post-conciliar era, are harmful to souls. As I've demonstrated in previous videos, if y'all want examples, I can give you some, but it's becoming a pretty popular view, in fact, where people will limit safety to infallible teachings of the church only. Whereas, again, safety is understood to also be present for the entire integral mission of the church, not just its infallible teachings, but also its universally promulgated disciplinary decrees, liturgical and otherwise. Let's do this. Let's start with Salaverri first. So we're going over the Sacrae Theologiae Summa 1b on the Church of Christ, again by Joachim Salvaverri, written in the pre-conciliar era, lest you have reservations about something in the post-conciliar era, which you shouldn't necessarily have those reservations just because it's in the post-conciliar era, but just for those who do, here we go. This is on page 270 with his paragraph starting paragraph 722, titled Regarding Disciplinary Decrees in General. Here's what he says. Regarding disciplinary decrees in general, which are purposefully connected with revealed truths. All right, so we're talking about disciplinary decrees that are connected to revealed truths, faith and morals. The end of the infallible magisterium demands infallibility concerning decrees of this kind. For the end of the infallible magisterium demands those things that are necessary in order to obtain the end for the life of the faithful in the church without error. So whatever decree touches on something that would then touch on the end of the faithful, the life of the faithful. These are infallible. Now, what he means by infallible here is not that they're irreformable, but they're safe. So what we would call an infallible safety. Not infallible insofar as it's the most prudent. Not infallible insofar as it can't be reversed or reformed. Infallible in the sense that it's safe. That's what he means, and you'll see here in a moment. But in order to obtain the end for the life of the faithful in the church without error, infallibility concerning the disciplinary decrees purposefully connected with the truths of a revelation is necessary. Therefore, the end of the infallible magisterium demands infallibility concerning the disciplinary decrees in general, which are purposefully connected with revealed truths. So if this disciplinary decree is connected to a revealed truth and it impacts the life of the faithful, there's a safety there. He says the major is clear because the end of the infallible magisterium finally must be ordained to this, that the faithful are directed without error in attaining the end of the church. So one of the purposes of the infallible magisterium is to direct the faithful to their supernatural end. And if the church is taking them away from that, then it's going against the very purpose of an infallible magisterium, which means you no longer have the indefectibility of the church. The church has proven itself to be defectible. And why waste your time as a Catholic at that point? Start looking elsewhere. If the church has defected from the faith, if its infallible magisterium has failed, there's no point in being a Catholic. He goes on, the minor is certain from the definition itself of the disciplinary decrees in general, which are connected purposefully and necessarily with revealed truths. And then he says, go to number 703. That is paragraph 703. Okay, well, let's do that. Before we continue with Salaverri, let's first go back to his paragraph 703 and see what he says. Paragraph 703, page 261 in my edition, he says, dispositive decrees connected purposefully with revealed truths are universal laws. So we're talking about universal laws. We're not talking about something in a limited territory. Universal laws enacted by the supreme authority of the church in order to properly direct the life of the faithful to the end or purpose of the church, to their supernatural end. These decrees are not divine laws, but ecclesiastical. They're not divinely imposed. God has not imposed these in sacred revelation, but it is ecclesiastical. That is, it's promulgated by the church, which are said to be purposefully connected with revealed truths, because they are ordained for the purpose of the faithful, that the faithful may obtain supernatural salvation. So they're ordained, they're ordered to bring about the salvation of the faithful, according to the manner established by God by his positive revelation. So that the church has this ability is in divine revelation. They concern directly the power of ruling. Its real purpose is to establish, enforce, and justify universal precepts. However, they do pertain indirectly to the power of teaching. So they might not actually be directly a teaching. It could be disciplinary, but they do pertain indirectly to teaching, inasmuch as they presuppose certain principles of doctrine. I mean, it's certainly the case that many liturgical decrees and disciplinary decrees of the church do presuppose some teachings and doctrine. And it says they presuppose certain principles of doctrine which cannot be subjected to error in the church, which are, for example, that the church has the power to prescribe all of them. So number one, that the church has this authority, which is certainly substantiated by the Council of Trent and Vatican I. That the observation of the universal precepts of the church is in harmony with the doctrine and morals and suitable for obtaining the end of the church. So again, these liturgical decrees, disciplinary decrees that are universally promulgated, they are going to be oriented to the supernatural end of the individual. And they also presuppose certain ideas about faith and morals. So the church cannot err here in this matter. There is a safety there. It can't detract them from their path to God. So there's nothing in its universal liturgical decrees, for example, that it would be harmful for souls. So those who would say you can't attend the Novus Ordo, even if it's done reverently or properly, because it has poison in it, it has all kinds of problems with it, they're going contrary to this. Because they're saying, look, this is harmful to your soul to attend a Novus Ordo that is reverent. That would be an example of somebody going contrary to this and effectively conceding the defectibility of the church, whether they admit it or not. He says these decrees are gathered together, especially in the Code of Canon Law. Paragraph 704. Disciplinary decrees in general are either juridical, which are obtained to determine, enforce, and vindicate the rights and offices of the faithful, or liturgical. So when we talk about disciplinary decrees, we're talking about liturgical decrees, juridical decrees. He speaks of liturgical and says, which are prescribed to order divine worship in the administration of holy things, or magisterial. So now we have three categories of disciplinary decrees: juridical, liturgical, and magisterial. And he says of magisterial, which are disposed to promote ecclesiastical instruction and to moderate the preaching of evangelical doctrine. He references a whole bunch of sources. Maybe just comment and I'll give you those sources if you would like them. Going back to paragraph 722, actually now we're on paragraph 723. Let's continue with his section on disciplinary decrees in general. He says the church claims for herself infallibility concerning these decrees. So this isn't just a theological opinion of a theologian. No, this is something the church herself claims. So whenever you say the church can impose a liturgy that's destructive and harmful to souls, or a disciplinary decree that's not liturgical but maybe is juridical or magisterial that is harmful to souls, you're going against what the church actually teaches about herself. So you're not just going against an opinion, you're going against the church. Which is ironic, because it's usually those who take this erroneous position that the church can err in these liturgical decrees, and by err here I mean in such a way that would be harmful to souls. It's usually those same people who think that they're in accord with the church, that think that they maintain the church and its teachings. And in fact, ironically, they're the very ones who are in dissent from it, which means they actually have no basis to criticize other people like Father James Martin and the liberals who are also in dissent. They don't have a leg to stand on because they're in the same position. All right, here's what it says. The church claims for herself infallibility concerning these decrees. Concerning disciplinary decrees in general, what we said above is certain from Pius VI in the Constitution Auctorum Fidei. Pay attention, because we're going to see this again in Van Noort. He's going to cite the exact same part from Auctorum Fidei to back up the same idea. So this is not just the interpretation of Salaverri. Auctorum Fidei in 1794, whereby he condemned the errors of the Synod of Pistoia in Denzinger. And I know there's different versions of Denzinger. I will show you the one that he's referencing, Denzinger 2678. We're going to take a look at that. What Pius VI condemns from the Synod of Pistoia is effectively what people are saying today when they say the church can impose a universally promulgated liturgy or disciplinary decree that is harmful to souls. They're condemned by Pius VI. Let's look at that first before I condemn with Salaverri, or continue with Salaverri. Let's go to, and I'm going to share my screen for this since I have it in electronic format. Okay. Denzinger 2678. Some of your editions might say 1578. Again, there's different versions of Denzinger. But this is, once again, from Auctorum Fidei by Pius VI, condemning certain errors of the Synod of Pistoia. Okay. Denzinger, or Pius VI, I should say, says this. The prescription of the Synod about the order of transacting business in the conferences, in which, after it was prefaced in every article, that which pertains to faith and to the essence of religion, must be distinguished from that which is proper to discipline, it adds. In this itself, discipline, there is to be distinguished what is necessary or useful to retain the faithful in spirit from that which is useless or too burdensome for the liberty of the sons of the new covenant to endure, but more so from that which is dangerous or harmful. Did you hear that? Certain disciplines that are dangerous and harmful. The Synod of Pistoia is talking about church disciplines that are dangerous or harmful, namely leading to superstition and materialism, insofar as by the general authority of the words it includes and submits to a prescribed examination even the discipline established and approved by the church, as if the church, which is ruled by the Spirit of God, could have established a discipline which is not only useless and burdensome for Christian liberty to endure, but which is even dangerous and harmful and leading to superstition and materialism. Here's what the Pope says about it. It is false, rash, scandalous, dangerous, offensive to pious ears, injurious to the church and to the Spirit of God by whom it is guided, and guess what? And at least erroneous, which is what I've said in the past. And you can't just say, well, you're taking it out of context. They're talking about disciplinary decrees that are about superstition and materialism. Yes, that's what they're talking about. But then this is applied in general to liturgical and disciplinary decrees overall. So the point is, it's condemned. False, rash, scandalous, dangerous, offensive to pious ears, injurious to the church of the Spirit of God by whom it is guided, and at least erroneous. So people who come to you with this appearance of traditionalism, with this appearance of fidelity to the magisterium, some of these people are promoting an ideology that is condemned by the church and is considered erroneous, theologically erroneous. So not only would it be false, rash, scandalous, offensive to pious ears, but it's also theologically erroneous. In other words, it's under the theological censor of being erroneous, although some of these others are minor censors. This, at least erroneous, is one of the major censors. So a person who maintains this falls under a censor, a theological censor of the church, not just minor ones, but a major one. So that is how Salaverri is presenting this from Pius VI. And it's not just him, it's also others, as I'm going to show in a moment. Salaverri continues with his section here, 723, on liturgical and disciplinary decrees. In particular, concerning liturgical decrees that the church claims for herself infallibility is certain from the law of Eucharistic communion under just one species. Did you hear that? The point is this. The church in the Roman Rite changed the apostolic tradition. And here we're talking a human apostolic tradition, although we could also speak of a divine one. But it wouldn't be something that is irreformable. The church, because it was guarding against certain errors at that time, changed in the Roman Rite its discipline on the administration of the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, and gave the Eucharist under one kind instead of two, because whenever you receive Christ under one kind, you've received the entire Christ, the full body, blood, soul, and divinity. So if you receive them under one form, you've received the entire Christ. There was also a concern that people might spill the precious blood, and there was also those who were saying, no, if you receive under one kind, you don't receive the whole Christ. So in order to correct that problem, the church administered, in most cases, the Eucharist under one kind, which has been reversed since the Second Vatican Council, because in the vast majority of cases, that's no longer applicable to our day and time. I mean, the truths of it are, it's still true, you receive Christ fully, but the problems, the dangers that we were dealing with that gave rise to that alteration in our liturgy is no longer there. So we've reverted back to the more apostolic custom of administering under both kinds. But he says, in particular concerning liturgical decrees, and again, this is prior to the liturgical reforms of the Second Vatican Council. He's writing before that. In particular concerning liturgical decrees, that the church claims for herself infallibility is certain from the law of Eucharistic communion under just one species, which was solemnly mandated by the councils of Constance and Trent in Denzinger 1200, 1258, 1728 through 1732. The same point can be abundantly confirmed from other decrees by which the Council of Trent solemnly confirmed the rites and ceremonies which must be used in the administration of the sacraments and in the celebration of masses. Denzinger 1613, 1645, 1657, 1745, 1746, and 1757. It's that last one that I'll briefly look at with you rather than going through every one of these. Canon 7 from the session on the holy sacrifice of the Mass by the Council of Trent says, if anyone says that the ceremonies, vestments, and outward signs which the Catholic Church uses in the celebration of masses are incentives to impiety rather than the services of piety, let him be anathema. And historically, that's directed against Protestants, many of which were against the ceremonies, investments, and outward signs. But Trent is saying, look, the ceremonies, vestments, outward signs can't be used or can't be said to be incentives to impiety rather than piety. And there's an anathema attached to it. And so what Salaverri is saying is, and it's not just Salaverri who understands it this way. Salaverri is saying, this is an example of how the liturgical decrees of the church enjoy a certain infallibility. They enjoy a certain safety to them. That's just one example. Like I said, he gives many others. He goes over the decrees of solemn canonizations of saints, of the institution of religious orders. These are all also protected by an infallible safety. So we won't get into those now, but it is worth noting. Let's maybe look now at Van Noort. Then we're going to go to Donum Veritatis by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Then we're going to go to John Paul II. And again, this is not an exhaustive list of sources. I'm just giving you some. All right, this one is fairly lengthy. This is again from Monsignor Van Noort's Dogmatic Theology. This is going to be volume 2 on Christ Church. My edition is page 114. Looks like we're on paragraph 90. Assertion 3. The church's infallibility extends to the general discipline of the church. Again, this is also a preconciliar manualist. The church's infallibility extends to the general discipline of the church. The proposition is theologically certain. So it's not just an opinion. By the term general discipline of the church are meant those ecclesiastical laws passed for the universal church. So we're not talking about some kind of discipline in a local territory. We're talking about universal disciplines. Ecclesiastical laws passed for the universal church for the direction of Christian worship and Christian living. So these decrees that deal with liturgy and the life of the faithful are protected. Note the italicized words ecclesiastical laws passed for the universal church. The imposing of commands belongs not directly to the teaching office, but to the ruling office. So they come from the ruling office of the church, but they do touch on its teachings because they're related to its teachings. Disciplinary laws are only indirectly an object of infallibility. So they're indirectly an object of infallibility, only by reason of the doctrinal decision implicit in them. So insofar as these liturgical and disciplinary decrees touch on a matter of doctrine and faith and morals, they're protected indirectly. And I'll tell you, an entire liturgy promulgated by a pope in an apostolic constitution, which is the highest document that a pope can issue, which is also the same context in which two ex cathedra definitions have been offered. I would say that's pretty high. And I would say that certainly impacts faith and morals. When the church's rulers sanction a law, they implicitly make a twofold judgment. This law squares with the church's doctrine on faith and morals. That is, it imposes nothing that is at odds with sound belief and good morals. So the discipline is not going to go against faith and morals. That is, it imposes nothing that is at odds with sound belief and good morals. This amounts to a doctrinal decree. This law, considering all the circumstances, is most opportune. This is a decree of practical judgment. So now he's talking about two different kinds. Those that touch on faith and morals, he's going to call doctrinal decrees. And then those that are most opportune, he's going to call practical judgment. Now, those that are most opportune can be reformed, certainly, because the church has never been promised infallibility concerning prudence. Now, it has been promised infallibility concerning prudence in its habitual prudential decisions, as we're going to see from Donum Veritatis, but not any individual prudential decree. An individual judgment can certainly be reformed, and we can certainly say it might not be the most prudent. But is it harmful to souls? No, those are not the same thing. Although it would be rash to cast aspersions on the timeliness of a law. Did you hear that? There are a lot of people, many of them who present themselves as faithful traditional Catholics, who will say just this. They will say that the church's decrees are not canonical. They're ultra vires, all kinds of other things. Noort is going to say rash. Can we say in some cases, like I've said of Traditionis Custodes, I'm not so sure this was the most timely moment in time to really implement this, Your Holiness? Yeah, I think we could say that. According to Donum Veritatis, we can certainly say that. But it would be rash to just immediately give a knee-jerk reaction to every disciplinary decree of the church. You want to be more careful with that. You want to really give it some thought. And after really giving it some thought, if you have some reservations about the timeliness, Donum Veritatis does say that you could question those things. So, for example, I do think that Traditionis Custodes, though not harmful to souls, is probably not the best timing. Certainly, in my opinion, not the most prudent as far as timing, because the Novus Ordo, as I've said before, if we're going to move people into the Novus Ordo in the Roman Rite, I think we need to do better with cutting out liturgical abuses, and that just hasn't been handled yet. So it's not, in my opinion, fitting. It's not the most appropriate time to implement that. But you know what? I'm not gonna say it's harmful to souls, and I'm not going to say that the church and the Pope doesn't have the authority to promulgate it. And there are people who are saying just those things, that it's harmful to souls, that it's destructive to the faithful, and that the church doesn't even have this authority. That's actually theologically erroneous, in addition to being rash, as we're seeing here. Although it would be rash to cast aspersions on the timeliness of a law, consider again Donum Veritatis, which we'll look at in a moment, especially at the very moment when the church imposes or expressly reaffirms it. Still, the church does not claim to be infallible in issuing a decree of practical judgment. So it's when it comes to the prudence of a decree, that is not infallible, as insofar as it might not be the most timely, but it does have a safety to it insofar as it won't be harmful to souls. Because if it were harmful to souls, that would then lead the faithful away from their ultimate supernatural end, which is heaven. So you have to walk a very fine line here, because we can talk about reforming disciplinary decrees, and we can talk about the imprudence of some disciplinary decrees. But what we can't do is say the church doesn't have the authority. What we can't do is say that it is just rash without qualification. What we can't do is say that the church is destroying souls in these decrees. That's what we can't do. For the church's rulers were never promised the highest degree of prudence for the conduct of affairs. That's certainly true. But the church is infallible in issuing a doctrinal decree as intimated above, and to such an extent that it can never sanction a universal law which would be at odds with faith or morality, or would be by its very nature conducive to the injury of souls. Again, there are some very well-known traditionalists that are all over YouTube and all over the speaking circuit that are saying exactly that. They're going contrary to what Noort is saying here, and Noort is basing his understanding on Pius VI. And again, we've also had Donum Veritatis and a few others since then that Monsignor Van Noort didn't have the benefit of. The church's infallibility in disciplinary matters, when understood in this way, harmonizes beautifully with the mutability of even universal laws. Yes, some universal laws can be reversed. But is that contrary to this idea of an infallible safety? No, says Monsignor Van Noort. Because there's a difference between something being the most prudent and most timely versus something that is harmful and destructive to souls. There's a huge difference there. And people will make that jump. They will say, well, just because you can reform disciplinary decrees, that proves that the church can impose a discipline that is harmful to souls. No, that does not logically follow. You have to be more careful in your thinking. For a law, even though it be thoroughly consonant with revealed truth, can, given a change in circumstances, become less timely or even useless, so that prudence may dictate its abrogation or modification. I'll give you a perfect example of that. Communion under one form. I think the Roman Rite needed to implement that disciplinary decision when it did. It was dealing with some very serious problems. And so it took that measure. And a lot of Protestants ended up being opposed to it because they were saying it goes against the apostolic practice and what Christ himself instituted. And to an extent, that's true. But this was something that the church has the authority to reform. And that's what Trent was arguing. Constance and Trent. Whereas the Protestants were saying, no, it doesn't have that ability. Now, again, we maintain the church had that authority to do so, but by the time of the Second Vatican Council, really the things that we were fighting against really were no longer applicable, or at least they weren't applicable to the extent that it would necessitate that discipline. So we ended up going back to and restoring the original tradition because the circumstances have changed. Now, some might say, well, the problem of perhaps spilling the precious blood is still there. Right, right. It is. And in those cases, the church has instructed that if there's a possibility, if there's a local congregation that is spilling the precious blood, they should no longer administer under both forms until that is addressed. So the church still deals with that. It's just dealing with it in a slightly different way. So it goes on. This is page 115 of Van Noort. He goes over his proofs for what he just said. From the purpose of infallibility. The church was endowed with infallibility that it might safeguard the whole of Christ's doctrine and be for all men a trustworthy teacher of the Christian way of life. But if the church could make a mistake in the manner alleged when it legislated for the general discipline, it would no longer be either a loyal guardian of revealed doctrine or a trustworthy teacher of the Christian way of life. So the point is, if the church can't preserve its faith and morals in the life of its faithful, as far as what it's directing them to, if it can't preserve that, it's useless. It's fallen away. He goes on, it would not be a guardian of revealed doctrine, for the imposition of a vicious law would be. For the imposition of a vicious law would be, for all practical purposes, tantamount to an erroneous definition of doctrine. That is because it is going to assume certain doctrines. Everyone would naturally conclude that what the church has commanded squared with sound doctrine. It would not be a teacher of the Christian way of life, for by its laws it would induce corruption into the practice of religious life. And yet, isn't that what some people are telling us today? Under the guise of tradition? It's a false tradition. It's not tradition as such. But sometimes they come clothed in this appearance of tradition and an appearance of piety. And yet they're saying exactly this. They're saying that the church is corrupting souls in its disciplines. Well, Noort is saying, well, it's no longer a teacher of the Christian way of life because those disciplines do touch on matters of faith and morals. I mean, it's really hard to name a discipline that doesn't touch on a matter of faith and morals. I'm sure we could do it, but the majority of them, it's really hard to say it doesn't touch on some matter of faith and morals. He goes on, the well-known axiom, lex orandi est lex credendi, the law of the prayer is the law of belief, is a special application of the doctrine of the church's infallibility in disciplinary matters. And yet, again, those who maintain this erroneous position are the ones who tend to trump this idea of lex orandi, lex credendi. And yet they're going very contrary to that idea with their presentations. This axiom says, in effect, that formulae of prayer approved for public use in the universal church cannot contain errors against faith or morals. So again, those who are saying the Novus Ordo, the liturgical disciplines of the church in the post-conciliar era are destructive to souls, those who would make a whole argument based on Bunini and his role in the Novus Ordo miss the point that it was promulgated by a pope, and it was promulgated universally by a pope. Therefore, it cannot be harmful to faith or morals, no matter who an architect may have been prior to that. And again, as I've mentioned, those who would be consistent would end up having to throw away a lot of the ecumenical councils because there were some people who participated in them, and especially the orthodox decisions that we've adopted that were less than desirable characters. Their behavior was less than desirable, I should say. But it would be quite wrong to conclude from this that all the historical facts are recorded here and there in the lessons of the Roman Breviary, or all the explanations of scriptural passages which are used in the homilies of the Breviary must be taken as infallibly true. As far as the former are concerned, those particular facts are not an object of infallibility, since they have no necessary connection with revelation. As for the latter, the church orders their recitation not because they are certainly true, but because they are edifying. But I would say even with these, I would say there's a safety behind them. Even if the proposition of them might not always be true, at least there's a safety there. He goes on, assertion 4, the church's infallibility extends to the approval of religious orders. And then he also goes over the approval of canonization of saints, just like Salaverri. Now, one of the things that Van Noort lists as a proof for what he's saying is, guess, take a wild guess, Auctorum Fidei. Auctorum Fidei. Earlier when he said from the official statement of the church, which stigmatized as at least erroneous. Actually, I don't think I've read that part to you. Let me go ahead and read it because yeah, I think I just skipped that one part. Let me read it to you. From the official statement of the church, which stigmatized as at least erroneous the hypothesis that the church could establish discipline which would be dangerous, harmful, and conducive to superstition and materialism. So what he's saying here is the church officially backs up the infallible safety of its liturgical and disciplinary decrees in Pius VI Auctorum Fidei when he condemned this proposition. That is, that the disciplines of the church could be dangerous, harmful, and conducive to superstition and materialism. Notice again, it's not just conducive to superstition and materialism that they're claiming. They're also claiming they could be dangerous or harmful. So you can't just say, well, Auctorum Fidei is just dealing with those who say that the church's disciplines could lead to superstition and materialism. Yeah, that's true, but that's not all they were claiming. They are also claiming that they could be dangerous and harmful. Those as well. That's condemned by the church, and it's condemned as erroneous, and Van Noort picks up on that and cites it. Moving forward with our case here, let's go to Donum Veritatis. Let me share my screen since I have it in an electronic format. Paragraph 24, section 3, when it comes to the question of interventions in the prudential order, it could happen that some magisterial documents might not be free from all deficiencies. In other words, there could be some deficiencies in the prudential decisions of the church. No surprise there. It could be that they're not the most timely. Does all deficiencies here mean it's harmful to souls? No. And you'll see why. Bishops and their advisors have not always taken into immediate consideration every aspect of the entire complexity of a question. I would say, respectfully, some aspects of Traditionis Custodes I would argue, fall in this category. But it would be contrary to the truth if, proceeding from some particular cases, one were to conclude that the church's magisterium can habitually be mistaken in its prudential judgments. In other words, its prudential judgments can't be habitually mistaken. Or that it does not enjoy divine assistance in the integral exercise of its mission. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? That's big. That magisterially backs up everything I've told you. In one sentence. Backs up what I just told you. Let me explain why. Again, this is by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Instruction Donum Veritatis. Look at this. Go to the end. The instruction was adopted at a plenary meeting of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and was approved at an audience granted to the undersigned Cardinal Prefect by the Supreme Pontiff, John Paul II, who ordered its publication. This is magisterial. That would be in common form. Go back over here. It was approved by the Pope in common form. It's part of the authoritative um, authoritative magisterium of the Holy Father. So it requires religious submission of intellect and will. But watch what it says. It would be wrong to say that the church does not enjoy divine assistance in its integral exercise of its mission. What do you think that means? Integral exercise. That is in its entire mission. So that's going to include not just its teachings, but also its disciplines, its universal disciplines, because we're talking about the church. We're not talking about a local member of the church or something. We're talking about the church universal, which the Pope certainly is able to speak at for the universal church. So we're talking about the Pope in his universal magisterium, or we're talking about an ecumenical council. It enjoys assistance in the integral exercise of its mission. That means then even the prudential decisions of Vatican II cannot be said to be harmful to souls. And you know there are a lot of people saying that. No, even they enjoy divine assistance. What does this mean, a divine assistance? Well, does that mean Vatican II? Does that mean a pope in his universally promulgated liturgical or disciplinary decrees is always right? Is always timely? It's always the most prudent? No. Divine assistance doesn't mean that, because it's telling us in context it's not going to be the most prudent in all cases. So it can't mean that. What does then divine assistance mean? It has to mean that the Holy Spirit at least guarantees its safety. It's not going to be destructive to souls if somebody were to maintain it and follow it and adhere to it. So nothing that Vatican II and its discipline is promulgating is going to be harmful to souls. It's going to enjoy some divine assistance. Nothing that the church promulgates universally, liturgically, for the Novus Ordo Missae, for example, is going to be destructive to souls. It enjoys divine assistance because the church enjoys divine assistance in its integral exercise, not just in its teachings on faith and morals. Again, this is magisterial. Now, if you don't want to accept the magisterium, that we have to have a different discussion. But at least at that point, it's obvious that you're out of step with the magisterium. But if you accept the magisterium in the post-conciliar era, you can't say such things. But I know some of these people reject the magisterium in the post-conciliar era. Well, isn't that part of the problem? It says, in fact, the theologian who cannot pursue his discipline well without a certain competence in history is aware of the filtering which occurs with the passage of time. There's a whole lot we could say this. I did some more on this section when it comes to 4th and 5th level teachings. We speak of the first 3 levels that you could see there in the Profession of Faith promulgated by John Paul II, and then expressed also in the CDF's document, which is really a commentary of Bertone and Ratzinger on the concluding paragraphs of the Profession of Faith. We see 3 levels there, but then we can also speak of a 4th and 5th level. That's where they're getting this from, by the way. So if you've ever heard of me speak of 4th and 5th level teachings, which are really not necessarily teachings per se, they're more, it's a little bit more qualified than that. This is where I'm getting it from. I'm getting it from Donum Veritatis, among other places. I did a whole course dealing with the magisterium, and I engaged this document in some detail. The course is called Understanding the Magisterium. It's available at maximusinstitute.com if you want to get that course on the magisterium. So if you want to hear more about that, because there's a lot more we could say about what it's addressing here. There's a lot more to unpack. Maybe go and check out that course, because if I were to go into it now, we would get way off track. But it says this. This is not to be understood in the sense of a relativization of the tenets of the faith. The theologian knows that some judgments of the magisterium could be justified at the time in which they were made, because while the pronouncements contain true assertions and others which were not sure, both types were inextricably connected. Only time has permitted discernment, and after further and deep study, the attainment of true doctrinal progress. Wow, there's so much going on there. But the point is that there could be some things that it was timely at the time in which it was issued, but it's no longer fitting for today because circumstances have changed. That doesn't mean doctrine changes, no. But it does mean some of the circumstances for some of these disciplinary decrees could change. Okay. Lastly, let's see what it says here. We're going to General Audience by John Paul II, Wednesday, March 24th, 1993, confirming what I was saying. Look at this. He goes over in previous paragraphs the infallible magisterium. He talks about ex cathedra teachings of a pope. But then he shifts to a different kind of infallibility, not ex cathedra teachings. And that might leave you scratching your head. Wait, what? Infallibility of a pope when it's not ex cathedra? Watch what it says. The supreme pontiffs can exercise this form of magisterium, and this actually happened. However, many popes have not exercised it. He's talking about ex cathedra. But it should be noted that in the conciliar text that we are illustrating, the ordinary magisterium is distinguished from the extraordinary one, underlying the importance of the former, which is permanent and continuous, while what it expressed in the definitions can be said to be exceptional. Watch. Along this infallibility of ex cathedra definition. So we're not talking about ex cathedra teachings of a pope. We're saying along with those, that is other than ex cathedra teachings, there is the charism of assistance of the Holy Spirit. Wait, what? Huh? And this isn't the only time popes say this. This isn't just John Paul II. This is actually something that frequently comes up from the first millennium well into the second millennium. Popes talking about a charism and a protection of the Holy Spirit, and it's clearly in the context of non-ex cathedra teachings. He's talking about a charism of assistance of the Holy Spirit for non-ex cathedra definitions, granted to Peter and his successors so that they do not err in matters of faith and morals. Wait, what? I thought the Pope was only infallible in matters of faith and morals whenever he defined something ex cathedra. It's certainly true that when the Pope defines something ex cathedra, that is always infallible in matters of faith and morals. But here he's talking about an infallibility concerning faith and morals by the Pope outside of ex cathedra. What is he talking about? I mean, some have had the idea of a ordinary papal infallibility outside of ex cathedra definitions, but I think that Dr. Joy puts that one to death. Although Dr. Joy, I think, may have misunderstood what John Paul II was saying here. But I overall agree with what Dr. Joy was expressing in his dissertation, which I think puts to rest this idea of an ordinary papal infallibility. So I don't think the Pope is talking about an ordinary papal infallibility here, although he is talking about the ordinary magisterium, and he is talking about a divine assistance, and he is talking about not erring in faith and morals. So some are going to say, well, isn't that an ordinary infallibility? No, not so fast. Not so fast. Because of what we just saw. I understand John Paul to be saying, in accordance with everything else that we saw, and in accordance with what we saw him promulgate with Donum Veritatis, that the Spirit is guaranteeing the safety of disciplinary decrees that touch on faith and morals, and they're guaranteeing the teachings of a pope when they're not defined ex cathedra on faith and morals, insofar as they are infallibly safe. That doesn't mean the discipline can't be reversed. And it doesn't mean that the teaching is not or is definitive. The proposition might be reformed when it comes to these non-definitive teachings, not when it comes to dogmas. The proposition could be reformed. However, the safety of those teachings are guaranteed by the Holy Spirit. So that's what I think John Paul II is talking about. Now, I only mention him last because that one requires a little bit more reading into what, perhaps not reading into, but interpretation, I should say, of what John Paul is getting at. But I think in light of the avalanche of all the resources we've seen, that's the best way to understand John Paul II here, because he's not talking about an infallibility of non-definitive teachings. That wouldn't make sense. And he's not talking about an infallibility as far as the propositions. He's not talking about an infallibility of non-definitive teachings. If they're non-definitive by definition, they could be reversed. And he's also not talking about an ordinary infallibility either, for the reasons why I think, for the reasons why I mentioned, which is what John Joy expresses in his dissertation. I think he shows that that's a mistaken notion. But he's talking about an infallible safety to teachings on matters of faith and morals when they're not definitive, and also when it comes to the disciplinary universal decisions of the Pope, they enjoy an assistance of the Holy Spirit. And in that sense, they do not err. Not in the sense of the proposition necessarily, but in the sense of being harmful to souls. And instead, they give good illumination to the Christian people. The charism is not limited to exceptional cases, but encompasses the entire exercise of the magisterium. Did you hear that? The entire exercise of the magisterium, which would include disciplinary decrees promulgated by the magisterium. But notice what he says, to varying degrees. the charism is there to varying degrees. Well, this is one of the reasons why I don't think that he's talking about an ordinary papal infallibility, because how can you have varying degrees of infallibility? you can't have varying degrees of infallibility. So he's not talking about not erring as far as the proposition, because in that case, you can't have varying degrees. What he's talking about is a safety. But at the very least, the presence of the Holy Spirit is going to guarantee, at the very least, that they won't destroy souls. But that is, the more authoritative they are, the more forceful it is in the promulgation, the more frequent, that's going to enjoy even more protection of the Holy Spirit. But at the bare minimum, there's going to be some assistance of the Holy Spirit to prevent a person from falling away if they were to obey those decrees. Obey or trust, I should say. That's a source often overlooked, by the way. A lot of people don't discuss this, but I think they should. And I think we need to grapple with what John Paul II is saying here. Let's see, we're at an hour. That was the resources that I had picked out for us today. Like I said, there are more, but I wanted to get just a few to go over, because have been people that have asked me to present some sources for this stuff, which I've done here and there in videos, but it's always nice to have everything, in one place. So from now on, I can just refer people to one video. And if it's necessary for me to do another one in more detail or engaging something else, I can do that. Trying to see if there's anything in the chat. Very briefly, I'll take just a couple questions. Make sure to send them to @Reason in Theology. And then after that, I'll head out. Let's see. Looking through, I see a lot of comments. Just trying to find a question. Okay, here's a good question. Can the Pope wound souls without being harmful to them in the sense of leading them to damnation? Okay, all right. So what we were talking about is the official capacity of a pope or a council in promulgating disciplinary decrees that are universal. Okay, that's what we were talking about, enjoys a protection of the Holy Spirit. Understood here as an infallible safety. However, can a pope not acting as the universal pontiff, not promulgating something, but in his behavior scandalize people? In his behavior and his words, not acting as pope, but as an individual, private individual, can he say things that are imprudent? Can he even say things that are scandalous and harmful to people? Yeah. I think that's pretty well established. I I'm not going to mention names here, but I think we can all think of some examples here. Yeah, a pope can harm souls in that sense, but he's not harming souls as the pope. He's harming souls as more acting as a private individual. And that's a distinction that is very important that we see in the early second millennium. Popes who are popes, but then also are acting in their private person as a private theologian in some cases. We have to grapple with that, and we have to make some distinctions. Yeah, he's the pope, but he's not always acting in that office. So it's kind of like the president. I mean, yeah, the president is the president, but does he always act in his office as the president? No. Sometimes he acts outside of that. So can the pope do something that is destructive and harmful to souls, as far as maybe he's doing something scandalous, or he says something scandalous? He does something sinful. Yeah. Yeah. So that's not where we're talking about an infallible safety and a protection of the Holy Spirit. We're talking about whenever they function in their office. Same for the collection of bishops, the college of bishops. Drew Black says, excellent material, Michael. Thank you. I appreciate that. The Logos Project says, Donum Veritatis speaks of theologians. What is the criteria of being a theologian? Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So very technically, Donum Veritatis, when it's using the concept of theologian, or the term of theologian, to my recollection, is talking about those who have a mandate from their bishop. So not just somebody who studies theology or even teaches theology professionally. It's talking about, very technically, somebody who has a mandate from the bishop. So that would be a theologian who has a mandate. However, what it's saying there, could it apply to theologians who don't have a mandate, or to people who are just regular laity who aren't professional theologians? I would say it applies, but with an even higher obligation to understand the magisterium, because the thing that Donum Veritatis is doing over and over and over is saying the theologian has a duty to try to understand the magisterium, to try to reconcile what it says with the past. If that's true of a professional theologian who has a mandate, how much more is it for those of us who are less trained in theology, who are not professionals, right? I mean, how much more is it true for those? So I think the truth of what it's saying still applies, but there's a higher degree of responsibility. In other words, you need to be very careful to start dissenting from the magisterium and saying, oh, I don't have to believe that. It's a good question. Okay. From John, do decrees that pertain to the Latin Rite, that is restrictions to the Roman Rite, count as universal disciplinary decrees? This is a good question. Because in one way you want to think of the Roman Rite as just kind of like one segment of the church, but frankly, the Roman Rite is so pervasive that it is at the point of universality. Because us in the Eastern churches are so small and the Roman Rite is so large, yeah, these liturgical disciplines of the church for the Roman Rite are universal, which is exactly what Noort and Salaverri are thinking, because they pointed to restriction of communion under one kind. That's a Roman Rite discipline. That's not a discipline for the Oriental churches. So clearly they're thinking that the Roman Rite is universally promulgated, which I would agree with. It is a rite that has been promulgated universally. So in the sense of universal disciplinary decrees, I would put the Roman Rite in that category. But I could see why some people would think, well, wait, isn't the Latin Rite just a part of the church? However, I will also say, with those disciplinary decrees of the lesser churches, lesser as far as numbers, not as far as honor or, piety or reverence or anything like that. But as far as numbers, so I'm talking here about the Eastern churches. Is there an infallible safety even in what the church promulgates for them? Yes, there is. So I would include them among the universally promulgated decrees, although it's much less visible since they're so small. So I could see somebody saying, well, I don't see that as universal. But those disciplinary decrees touch on matters of faith and morals. And what you would be saying is if they don't enjoy divine assistance, those people in those Eastern churches the church could lead them away from heaven, which okay, that's going too far. Clearly, our definition needs to include those as well. Good question, though. So Giga Sniper, has the magisterium advocated for COVID vaccinations? It's effectively said that you ultimately need to let your conscience settle this issue. But if you don't take one, you need to use some kind of other measure to protect people in your life who are vulnerable to COVID. So would it be spiritually safe? Yes, it would be spiritually safe. However, if your conscience does not permit you to receive it, you need to use some other measure to protect the people who are vulnerable around you. Is it true you believe a faithful Catholic has grounds to reject official pronouncements of the magisterium as heretical? I feel like you have been misrepresented. What? I think you're right, Nicholas. I think I'm being misrepresented there. Do I believe a faithful Catholic has grounds to reject official pronouncements of the magisterium as heretical? I used to hold that thesis. I don't anymore. When I was mistaken in my theology, I used to hold that. But I've studied the magisterium in much more detail since then. And my studies have not led me to that conclusion. I used to think that the church could, in a non-definitive fashion, utter a heresy. I used to think that. I no longer maintain it for the very things that we just saw. The integral mission of the church is protected by a divine charism. It was in light of stuff like that, among others, that I realized, okay, wait, I'm out of step with the church here. And this popular view that I'm expressing is coming from radical traditionalists who are out of step with the magisterium. And when I realized that, I had to dial back some of my radical traditionalism. I mean, it's no secret I used to be a radical traditionalist. That's why I try to reach people who are still in that mindset, because I've been there and I've said all these things that they're saying. And I've seen the problems with them. I've seen where it leads to people, and I also see where it's contrary to magisterium. So unless they're basing this on something that I've said from way back in the day or something, I don't know. I don't maintain that now in light of my studies of the magisterium. I mean, we're all growing in theology. I remember there are some things that Augustine said in his earlier years that he had to reform in later years. Not that I'm as old as he was whenever he reformed some views. I've had to reform some things in a more expedited fashion with less years behind me. Yeah, I've had to reform a lot of aspects of my theology because I realized how out of step they were with the magisterium. The more I study the magisterium and what it teaches, the more I'm saying, okay, well, you know what, this I need to tweak this. I'm what I maintained here previously was wrong. I'm willing to be corrected by the magisterium, as I think everybody else should. Nobody's perfect in their theology. Everybody is going to make mistakes. The more important question is, are you open to being corrected by the church, or are you resisting the authority that Christ has put over you? That's what I'm more concerned about. Somebody who says something that's wrong, we all do that. That happens. I'm more concerned about somebody who obstinately maintains an error over against what the church says. That's troubling to me. But yeah, you're right. I'm surely misrepresented there. I don't believe the church can officially pronounce something that is heretical. I And I don't believe that you could censor the church as teaching something as heretical. How would you do that? I mean, and upon what basis would you issue a theological censor against the church? I mean, as a theologian with a mandate or something over against the church, really? A theologian with a mandate is there to assist the church that has a magisterial capacity natively. So I don't see how a theologian could do that, even with one with a mandate. So, and I'm not a theologian with a mandate, so I don't know. I wouldn't be able to say that, and I don't think anybody else could. So, okay. When it comes to rare circumstances, can the faithful withhold assent, or is it only a theologian that can? Yeah, so this is kind of what I was getting at earlier. Okay, look, Donum Veritatis is noting about how in some of these non-definitive cases, though there's a safety there, the proposition itself might not be best expressed or something like that. In that sense, could a certain theologian withhold assent in those non-definitive cases while recognizing that the church still has a safety there? But could they withhold assent insofar as the timeliness and the prudence? In rare cases, yes. This is a well-trained theologian who's an expert in the area, who has really done due diligence in trying to harmonize what they're coming across here with the magisterium and what was previously taught. Is that descriptive of the vast majority of people online, the Facebook magisterium, the YouTube magisterium? Is that descriptive of them, the Twitter magisterium? Are they well-trained theologians who are really doing their best to try to harmonize the church? Okay, so obviously Donum Veritatis is not talking about them. However, what it's saying, could it apply to theologians without a mandate, professionally trained theologians, or even someone who's not professionally trained but has done an exceeding amount of study here? I think it would apply, but there's a greater deal of responsibility to them then. In other words, 99.99999% of the people who are withholding assent from the non-definitive magisterium are not in a position to be able to do that. 99.9999%. They're not in a position to do that. So we can talk about this 0.0000001% of people out there. We can do that. We can talk about that exception. But in the vast majority of cases, most people don't meet that description. So in other words, most people would do better by assenting to these non-definitive teachings of the church, because they're not in a position to withhold assent. By the way, withholding assent is not the same as dissent. And withholding assent is not the same as saying the church has promulgated something that is harmful to souls. So those who try to use Donum Veritatis to back up that thesis are out of step with Donum Veritatis itself, because again, paragraph 24.3 speaks about the Holy Spirit protecting the integral mission of the church. Can the Pope issue contradictory decrees? As far as the propositions, you could have a reversal. As far as the safety, it enjoys divine assistance. I hope people aren't, going to take me out of context, because I'm being very, very specific and very qualified here. Because I'm not saying that disciplinary decrees are immutable. As we just read from Van Noort, they are immutable, and yet he could then speak about he speaks about them being mutable, and yet he could still speak about a divine charism and a protection and infallibility. How can he do that? Again, by the way that I just explained. A distinction there between the proposition and the safety of the decree. So YVF says, helpful and clarifying stuff for better understanding of the magisterium. I plan on taking your course in the near future. I appreciate that. Yeah. And it helps me out too. I mean, y'all know this is my primary source of income. Those of y'all who have purchased that course, I really, really appreciate y'all doing that. I hope it's been helpful for y'all. I intend to do more courses in the future. Maybe some on Vatican II. We'll see. Or maybe the papacy in history or something like that. But I really appreciate y'all who have purchased it, and I hope y'all benefited from it. I suspect that Reason in Theology is doing this video because of recent news with Father Heilman. No. I'm aware of that news, but no, that's not in my mind. I'm doing this in light of many people that I've seen ask me to do this video. That's number one. And they've asked me to do that video because they've seen me respond to many people who are saying that the church is imposing liturgical disciplines that are universally promulgated that are harmful to souls and teachings. I've been responding to those people. And if Father Heilman meets that description, I wouldn't know it. I've heard some things from Father Heilman, but I don't know if he meets the description of what I just said. If he does, then it applies to him as well. But I don't know what Father Heilman has said on this area, so I'm not going to speculate. It wasn't him that I had in mind. Are we all called to be theologians? In a sense of the term, right? In a very general sense of the term. That doesn't mean that we all have the charism of teaching that we see mentioned in the New Testament. And that doesn't mean that we're all called to be a professional theologian or to be a theologian with a mandate. There's about 4 distinctions that I can think of there. I mean, there's the general sense in which everyone is a theologian. There's a more specific sense in which you have a charism of the Holy Spirit to teach. There's another more specific sense in which you're a professional theologian and you teach in a seminary. And then there is an even more specific sense in which you're a professional theologian and you have a mandate. Thanks for taking my question. A quick follow-up. How does that apply to Summorum Pontificum and it being rescinded later? Should Summorum Pontificum have been rescinded at this time, I think would be a good question. But can Summorum Pontificum be rescinded? Yes, it certainly can. However, does that mean just because Summorum Pontificum could be rescinded or has been rescinded, that Summorum Pontificum was harmful to souls? No. Neither would the document that would rescind Summorum Pontificum, such as Traditionis Custodes, which rescinded certain aspects of it, neither would it be harmful to souls. That doesn't mean it would be the most timely. That doesn't mean it would be the most prudent. I hope y'all understand the distinctions that I'm making here, that I've been saying over and over and over. Could one believe that a universally promulgated devotion is actually bad and contains spiritually harmful error? I don't believe so. For the same reasons of canonizations of the saints, liturgy, and so on and so forth. If there's something that is in there that is harmful to faith and morals, the church is no longer defectible in its exercise of infallibility and faith and morals, as we just read from Van Noort and Salaverri. So I would say this is included. Okay, so can you weigh in on the difference between pursuing theology and being an official theologian and the responsibilities that come with it? As far as responsibilities for the latter, read Donum Veritatis. That's what it's all about. As far as just pursuing theology less formally, that should be something every one of us does, but to various degrees. So to varying degrees according to our state of life. All of us need to learn more about God. All of us have that obligation, but some of us more than others, according to our state in life. Okay. Looking through. Trying to see what else is in the chat. Logos Project got a kick out of the Facebook Magisterium. I got that from Father Coppus. Props to him. The Facebook Magisterium. I'm going to start using that because it's something I encounter obviously daily. Being on social media, doing YouTube, I have to encounter people who are not trained in theology, who think that they're trained in theology. I call them the Facebook Magisterium because of Father Coppus. YouTube Magisterium, the Twitter Magisterium. These are, again, the people who speak authoritatively without the competency in the Magisterium to do so. Now, somebody who's trained in theology professionally and is, an expert in the Magisterium, I mean, some of them could appear on YouTube. I mean, Dr. John Joy has. So I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about people who aren't trained in theology, aren't trained in how to engage the Magisterium, but think that they are. Those are the people I'm talking about. So not everything on Twitter is bad. Not everything on YouTube is bad. Not everything on Facebook is bad. But 99% of it is. Okay. Would you agree that radical traditionalists have a parallel magisterium in popular and trad personalities, be they clerics or lay people? I mean, they sure act like it, at least. They won't say that they actually have a magisterium. But the problem is that some of these personalities are contrary and teaching contrary to the magisterium, and in areas that they're not authorized to do so. Which again is the ironic part, because they think that they're the ones that are being faithful to the magisterium. Okay. The idea that we must study the magisterium prior to us giving our assent of faith and will is false. Your thoughts? So the initial and ordinary disposition should be assent even prior to study. Okay, so it's not the case that I withhold assent until I'm convinced. No, it's that I am to assent, and if I have questions, continue to study and wrestle with what the church is saying. It's not the other way around. If that were true, all those liberals who disagree with Humanae Vitae, all the fans of Father James Martin are fine. They're perfectly fine to be out of step with the magisterium because they're not yet convinced. They're not yet convinced. So it's okay for them to withhold assent, right? No. So if it's not okay for the liberals, why is it okay for the ratrats? This is why I say liberals and ratrats, two sides of the same dissenting coin. You are to give that initial assent, and then in those incredibly rare cases of Donum Veritatis, we can speak of withholding assent. Venera says, very informative program. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Sean says, I declare bankruptcy. Yep. I need to watch some Office. Let's see. Okay, so help us understand the distinction between the church teaching heresy and the Pope possibly being a manifest heretic. Okay. First of all, the idea of a Pope being a manifest heretic is just an opinion. There has been no evidence that any Pope has ever been a manifest heretic. A manifest heretic is a Pope that has publicly and formally uttered a heresy, not in his magisterium, but just publicly, maybe informally, as a private individual, publicly uttered a heresy and formally maintains it, and has been corrected twice by perhaps the College of Cardinals or an imperfect ecumenical council. And so he's been corrected by the College of Bishops or the Cardinals. and still maintains that heresy. Again, he's not teaching it in his magisterium, but a person who holds the office of the papacy privately uttering, I should say publicly uttering in his private capacity as not as a pope, but just as an individual. So maybe in an interview on an airplane or something, uttering a heresy and still maintaining it after being corrected twice. That would then be a manifest heretic. There's different opinions there. Some would say he automatically loses the papacy. Others say no, an imperfect ecumenical council and the College of Cardinals have to declare that God has deposed him. Not that they depose him, but that God has deposed him. So that's not conciliarism for those who maintain that position. However, the more I just look at this, the more I want to say I just don't believe that that will happen. I don't believe you'll have this scenario. It hasn't happened in 2,000 years, and I don't believe it will happen. But if it were to happen, those are the options. Now, how does that differ from the church teaching heresy? Again, we were just speaking about a person who is in the office of Pope, but he's not acting in the office of Pope, so he's not promulgating something. He's not teaching it in a magisterial document, but he's saying something as a private person, but it's public. It's recorded on video or something. And he maintains it over against being corrected by the proper authorities, the College of Bishops. So, that would be the distinction. Now, again, will this ever happen? I don't believe so. Is this applicable to any pope in history? I don't believe this has ever happened, so I don't think it is. But there are some people who are holding out, hoping that this will happen so that we can get rid of these post-conciliar popes, or that they will depose these post-conciliar popes in a non-conciliarist fashion. To hold out and hope for that is a fool's errand. It's not going to happen. Anything else? How do we know which documents are ex cathedra and which aren't? You'll want to get my course on the magisterium. I'll go over that in detail. Also watch the magisterium playlist, which is available for free here on this channel. I'll go over that in various episodes dealing with papal infallibility. Okay, let's see. Okay, well, misplaced hope, Benedict asks. Yes, there are some people who think that Pope Francis is going to be deposed by the College of Bishops or by the Cardinals for some things that he said. And they're really holding out for that, hoping that they're going to rally up the College of Cardinals, College of Bishops, rally them all up, get them ready, and then they're going to all go and judge Pope Francis in a non-conciliarist way. It's not going to happen. I have a better alternative. I have a better thesis, and it's what I've provided here today. Okay. I think that's it, y'all. I don't see any other questions, so we'll end it there. I appreciate y'all watching. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Check me out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology. Check out that magisterium course too. It's going to be maximusinstitute.com, and the course is called Understanding the Magisterium. So if you want to learn more about church teaching authority, check it out. All right, y'all. I think that's going to do it. See you later. God bless. Oh, wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/Reason and Theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.